This is The Camp with Zach Heilprin and Jesse Temple.
Yes, welcome in. Badgers going through summer workouts. Jesse also going through summer workouts. We're going to get to all of the stuff that you've been up to here, Jesse, but I just wanted to check in. We are now, 10 days into the new venture at Badger Connect. How's everything going?
I think it's going great. I'm really happy with what we've been able to put out. I'm obviously biased, but I certainly hope that everybody out there listening who's a Badgers fan will consider becoming a member. I know we talked about this a week and a half ago or so, but it's $10 a month or $100 a year for the content-only membership. We've obviously got some other tiers, but we're just getting started, and there's a lot more good stuff on the way.
And there's been a lot of good stuff so far here these first 10 days, stories on both basketball and football. We also got videos of you and Billy Edwards. One I had seen already, so that one was good, but then getting to see the volleyball one that went out on Wednesday this week, because it's not just football and basketball, it's a lot of other sports as well, and looking forward to seeing more of these videos. But have you ever done something as hard as try to return a serve in volleyball? Athletically, I should say.
Well, I'd like to say a few weeks earlier when I worked out with the football team, that was not very easy. Yeah, man, I'm realizing the more I do a lot of these sports, the more I'm understanding I'm not good at a lot of them.
These are top level athletes, and you going into their world and into their sport, never easy, especially if you've never played it before, which is obviously like competitively trying to do that on the volleyball court. Not easy at all. But before we get into any of that other stuff, I wanted to start with recruiting, because it is still the month of June and there are still official visits going on, and Wisconsin is still trying to put together its 2026 class. The last time we talked, they had 3 commits. They added 2 more last week after our episode. So there's 5 here in the month of June, but it's kind of gone a little dry since then. And I know you did a story for today on some of the things that you're hearing about certain players in the class and where it stands and some of the positions that Wisconsin's still looking to add. When you look at this class and when you look at what they are trying to do, what stands out for you?
I'll start with the fact that this is going to ultimately end up being a much smaller class than what we saw the first 2 full recruiting cycles under Luke Fickell. If you go back, the 2024 class had 22 players. The 2025 class had 23 players. As it stands now, we're probably looking at somewhere in the 18-player range. Some of that may have to do with trying to hit home runs on guys and not connecting. And some of it might have to do with where they're at in the transfer portal or roster management. But you're right. They had a really good first weekend of the official visit season, the May 30th weekend, because they ultimately got 5 players who have since publicly committed that visited then. But there are a lot of holes left, and we're getting down to crunch time. So I went position by position on the remaining areas of need. And the one that is certainly number one and the biggest priority is running back. And the name we're all waiting on is Amari Latimer. We've been talking about him for quite some time. I would say the best way I can put it is Wisconsin is in an excellent position to get that commitment, but you're waiting until it actually comes to fruition. They brought him in on the first weekend of official visits. Then they brought him back last weekend for an unofficial visit. It says a lot about where Wisconsin believes it stands that the Badgers canceled official visits for every other running back that they had on their board, including a 4-star running back named Ryan Estrada, who was supposed to come last weekend. I know that the staff has communicated with Latimer that he's the only guy they're looking at. This would be a huge win for Devin Spalding, because this is a kid who's got 50-plus scholarship offers, could go anywhere he wants. I would say I'd be surprised if he ultimately does not commit to Wisconsin, but you just never know, because you've got schools like Georgia and Texas and Georgia Tech still in the mix. But I think that's where it's got to start, because it's a high-level tailback. You're coming off a 2025 cycle where you didn't sign any running back and you didn't add anyone through the transfer portal. So right now, he's the top of the board guy to watch.
So, and obviously a huge need for Wisconsin, and we've talked about it a number of times. I feel like this is the 3rd show that we've been talking about this guy and just waiting for his commitment to come in, and they need him. Like, it's, you could talk about all these other positions. They need a running back in this class, and he's obviously got so many offers from top programs that he would be just a huge ad. And also, if you don't get him, a huge, huge loss to what is a class that is, well, you said smaller in size, also a little bit lower ranked as well compared to these last few years. So the other spot that, and I know you said you went position by position, we'll do the same here, and we'll go to wide receiver. And the other guy that it felt like it was just a matter of time at wide receiver was Zachary Washington out of Illinois, and then he wanted a visit to Michigan State. Michigan State writer on three put in a prediction for them. As you noted here, he's going to West Virginia as well. Where does Wisconsin stand there?
I think they're still in a good spot, but the further it gets away from those official visits to Madison, the more you start biting your nails if you're at Wisconsin or if you're a fan, because then you're seeing some other schools. I think ultimately it's going to come down to Wisconsin or Michigan State. And yes, he is going to West Virginia. This is all these guys who are left on the board are important for Wisconsin. When you go back to running back, it's different because you're only going to take one. And if you don't get him, you're probably going down your board significantly at this point. You may not get anybody. You may have to go to the transfer portal. The good news at wide receiver is Wisconsin at least already has one guy committed in Tayshaun Bardo from Indiana, who has been huge for this class in terms of his personality and recruitment. I really like Washington. You look at the film, and of course you're going to see the best of the best, but he's dominating as a kick returner. He's beating dudes over the top with his speed. You get him into space, and he's just got such a dynamic playmaking ability. The other guy here who's still on the board is Jaden Pettit, and this is the type of guy. Sometimes you bring a guy in on an official visit, and he is of such a high grade or talent level that you will take him no matter who else you have committed. So even if they do get Washington, if Pettit said, I want to come to Wisconsin, they would be like, yeah, we're all for that. He's 6'4", he's so physical, he can win 50-50 balls. But again, these are guys who are seeing the process through, and that makes it way more difficult because he's already been to Oklahoma. He told me he's going to North Carolina and Missouri. And these guys can say all the nice things in the world about Wisconsin, but it just gets more nerve-wracking for the Badgers when those guys take more visits. And then, so Wisconsin is also trying to keep other options open, which is why this coming weekend, the third weekend of official visits, is so important. It's a very small number, about 4 or 5 guys that they have planned on coming. But Zion Legree is another wide receiver that they're bringing in, and he's someone who runs a 4.35 40-yard dash, at least the last time he was timed. So you've got to keep your options open because the people on your board can be swooped up pretty quickly. We've already seen a few this week, but wide receiver is another position to watch.
To the offensive line we go. Wisconsin has a couple commits there already in Ben Novak and Maddox Cochran. Are they going to be able to add another?
This is a tough one for me because I don't know if they're in a great spot to land a third. The good news is they made headway early. Novak committed a long time ago, so you've got 2 offensive linemen, but they brought 3 real high-level offensive linemen on official visits the first couple weekends. Jelani Miller was one from Arizona, but it was the first trip he ever made to Madison, and on Tuesday he committed to Stanford. This is part of the problem, too, when you get these out-of-state guys. If they're coming for the first time on an official visit, that's great. We've talked before about the sell that you have to Madison in May or June. It doesn't get any better weather-wise, but you're still having to make a decision when you've been on campus one time for a total of 48 hours. That's tough. So there are still 2 guys on the board, and I don't know if they're in a great position for either of them. Wilson Zaire is from Georgia, and he went to Wisconsin, but the Badgers are battling Georgia, Auburn, Michigan, Alabama. It's difficult for me to believe Wisconsin wins that. So that leaves Kamari Blair. And I talked to Kamari. Sometimes you can talk to someone and just get a sense of, all right, this guy obviously loves Madison. He's clearly going to commit. I don't know if I got that sense from him. I was like, well, where does Wisconsin stand? And he had to think about it. And he was like, they're still in contention, which I don't think is the best thing you want to hear. No. That doesn't mean the Badgers won't ultimately get him, but I think it'll be tough to pull him out of the SEC. He's been to South Carolina. He's still got trips to Ole Miss and Tennessee. So that's everybody Wisconsin has had on campus so far. And the other thing to consider is I think we're in an era where it's easier to add bodies down the road, but it's just not a great sign when your plan A guys or when you shoot for the star guys don't end up panning out and you need to fill the space. What Wisconsin can do is either go further down the board, or if you don't want to make a quick decision now, evaluate guys' film through the first 3 games of their senior season and start making offers. And if you still don't have anybody, well, that's what the transfer portal is for.
I feel like maybe this is where we should talk about offensive line and recruiting, because obviously you had a story with AJ Blazik and how that all comes together, right? How his approach to recruiting has resonated, as you said, nationally for offensive linemen, and it has. I mean, they brought in 10 in the last two classes. This one's a little bit more difficult, right?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're talking about three guys Wisconsin has brought in and may not get, but ultimately, I don't want to take away from what Blazek has been able to do because, on the whole, I think he's done a pretty damn good job with the guys he brought in. A year ago at this time, we were singing his praises because he went 4 for 4 during official visit season and bringing uncommitted offensive line in and ultimately getting them to pick Wisconsin. The six offensive linemen that he's either signed or generated commitments from since the time he was hired in January of 2024 have come from six different states. And so I think that's important. I actually was talking to him. He was in his car on the road driving from Wichita, Kansas to Kansas City, but he took me through what his visit plan was for that week. And he started off on a Sunday night by flying to Atlanta. Then he had a stopover in Oklahoma City. He was driving to Kansas City. That night he was headed to the Chicago area for a home visit. The next morning he was going to Philadelphia and then Pittsburgh and then Virginia and then Nashville, Tennessee before he was going to Madison. And I know all these position coaches are basically doing that, but I think it says a lot about the plan that Blazek has and the staff has to try and find the best offensive linemen across the country. And of course, it's worth noting that this was not a particularly strong year for offensive linemen in the class. Obviously, they did lose a three-star prospect in Gavin Meyer to Minnesota, but I don't know if in a lot of years he would have been your number one guy. So they've done a good job as a whole in the Luke Fickell era of supplementing not getting some of those in-state guys with really good players. Kevin Haywood, four-star player, would have been a starter this year at left tackle if not for the injury. You've got Emerson Mandel, who was the number 2 player in Minnesota, might end up being your starting right guard and certainly looks like he'll be a starter for several years. I know the in-state has been an issue and something that people keep talking about, understandably so. And AJ was quick to point out, like, he is putting a crap ton of effort into recruiting the state. The way Luke Fickell has his assistants recruit the state is a little bit different from how Paul Chryst did it, where Chris Herring was kind of just the general in-state guy. They've got different coaches who track various regions or areas of the state. So Blazek is responsible for the Fox Valley area, but he will obviously go across the state for offensive linemen. And he said, that's why I've been on the road 8 or 9 days, and this is when I was talking to him in May. He's like, I spent the first 3 days in the state of Wisconsin because we need to take care of this state. We need to start with a 4 to 6 hour radius within Madison. So they're obviously working a lot of different angles here, but I do think on the whole, talent wise, they brought in some really good players.
So let's get down to, or I should say, let's go to the other side of the ball with the edge. And they lose one commit in Carmelo Reed. He went to flip to Ole Miss, struck out a little bit on Mikhail Blade, which always felt like kind of a you were going for like a grand slam there, right? Like you were putting yourself out there. And then obviously Jackson Ford, another 4-star prospect who has visited and has some other visits set up. What is Wisconsin's outlook there now?
Well, when you have a decommit and a guy flip like that, it changes everything because Wisconsin thought it was set. Okay, we're going to bring in an edge guy. We found our guy. Now you have to really go back to the drawing board. And they did, like I've said, there are some guys they bring in and they, as I said, shoot for the stars. They did that with Mikhail Blade. He committed to Michigan after his official visit in the second weekend. And they had Jackson Ford. This is someone who's already been to Kentucky. He's still got Penn State, Ohio. He went to Penn State. He's got Ohio State and Michigan trips remaining. So this is where you get to that third weekend and you're trying to figure out, well, who else is a realistic option? And right now they've got Ben Duncombe, who's a 3-star prospect from Austin, Texas. He's set to visit. He's been to Oklahoma State. He has upcoming visits with Kansas State and Kentucky. If the Badgers knock it out of the park, maybe they can win that recruiting battle. But we've kind of seen how Wisconsin has changed the types of bodies and players that they want within that defensive front. And the edge guys are so vital to what they want to do. But we'll have to see because that's another position where they're sitting there right now and they've got 0.
Yeah, not ideal. Cornerback, one in the fold so far with Carson Elams. They do feel good about some others, though, that potentially could add.
Yeah, there's a kid who just visited, Jamian Theodore. He's from Canada. He's going to a boarding school in Tennessee. So he spent last year was his first year playing high school football in the United States. I think Wisconsin believes it's in a good spot. Tennessee will probably be the biggest competition at this point. But this is, I was talking about some of those other positions before. This is absolutely a position where Wisconsin doesn't want to take a guy just to take him. Again, when you get down into the third weekend and you're still wondering who's available, I think they believe they can do the evaluation in the fall. And this is something that a lot of schools do. Wisconsin certainly used to do this quite a bit under the previous staff, where they would tell a kid, we want to see the first 3 games of your season. And if it's good enough, then we'll offer you. Now, a lot of times we're talking about people going into their junior year, but you can also find really good players like this who are under recruited or developing late as seniors. And all you have to do is look at a year ago, because Wisconsin successfully went this route with Kairos Gaines. They didn't offer him until late in the process. They ended up getting that commitment. I think from what we saw out of Kairos Gaines this spring, that's a pretty good ad, especially late in the cycle. So that's where things stand for Wisconsin at cornerback at this stage.
Let's finish with safety, where they obviously need some bodies, but don't have any commits just yet.
Right. The Badgers want to add 2 safeties, don't have any commits, as you said. Even before the first weekend, it kind of had some midweek visitors, and Messiah Tilson, a kid from Rockford, Illinois, visited. Feels like he's trending away from Wisconsin. Now, he will hold his announcement ceremony on Monday, and he lists Wisconsin, Kentucky, Minnesota, and Rutgers as his finalists. But the Badgers brought in 3 safeties after that point that they're still trying to get, all uncommitted guys. Nick Reddish, who's from Charlotte, Chase Jeter, who's from Ashburn, Virginia, and then Zachary Taylor, a kid from Texas. The Reddish one would be huge for them, but they've got some serious competition because he's been to Virginia Tech. His 2 older brothers happen to play for Virginia Tech. Joseph's a cornerback, Quentin is a safety, and then he's got a Notre Dame visit that he's going to be on this weekend. So again, really tough if you don't get that initial commitment. It's good if you get someone in the first weekend because they can compare every subsequent visit to Wisconsin. But then the other 2 guys, I think the proximity to home could be something Wisconsin has to overcome, because, I mean, these guys are visiting schools in their home area. The one, though, that I think Wisconsin has a good shot with, at least at this point, is Zachary Taylor. It's interesting. He has 5 official visits. 3 of them are in Texas, where he's from. He's been to TCU and Texas Tech. He's still got Houston. He's also going to Pittsburgh. But he went to Madison and for the first time, and he and his family were just blown away by it. I mean, he told me he didn't think Madison would be like what it was, and that he loved it. He feels like he's a good fit. So that could be something that Wisconsin can win on. I mean, if I had to look at the guys who are available and say, who do I think are the most realistic commits, I certainly think Amari Latimer is in that conversation. I'd put Zachary Washington in there, and I'd also put Matthew Taylor in there. But again, when you're going to see this process through, it just makes everybody a little more nervous. So Wisconsin is bringing in 2 other safeties this weekend. They're teammates out of Marietta, Georgia, Tony Forney and Joel Combe. To me, Combe is a long shot. I mean, he's a real high-level safety. He's got a finalist group that has Wisconsin in it. It's got Missouri, Tennessee, USC, and Georgia, and he's announcing July 9th. But Forney feels like he may be a little more realistic, so we'll have to see. But as we've been discussing it, there's clearly a lot of people that are still on the board and a lot of positions Wisconsin still has to figure out here to close out the 2026 recruiting class.
Yeah, just feels a little bit different than the last couple of years for sure. And the on-field struggles absolutely play a role in it, but it can change really quickly too. And there are some guys that they absolutely have to get, and if they get some others, it works out. But obviously, Latimer at the top of that list. Let's stay with another guy who was a recruit. He's now here in Madison. His name's Mason Posa, out in New Mexico, one of the best wrestlers in that state, but also one of the best linebackers in the country. Badgers beat out a bunch of really, really good players. He's a guy that people are very, very excited about. Wisconsin's had so many good linebackers here in the last 15 years, and he could potentially be the next great one.
I've said this before on our show, Zach, but I think of Mason Posa as a Leo Chanel or Nick Herbig, where you turn on the film and you just see something that feels really special. And those guys ultimately became standout linebackers at Wisconsin, spent 3 seasons with the Badgers, and became NFL draft picks. And that is Mason Posa's dream and his goal. His dad told me, you 3 years of college football, then become a first-round NFL draft pick. Now, that might feel a bit ambitious. Wisconsin hasn't had a first-round draft pick since 2017 when they had Ryan Ramczyk and TJ Watt, who Posa lists as his favorite Badger. But there's a play. His dad told me a really good story about a play from – so when we were talking before about the 3rd game of your season, a lot of times, especially with juniors, that's how Wisconsin and programs evaluate is they'll say, we want to see your first 3 games of your junior year. We probably feel good about it, but we just want to know for sure that you're ready. And that's what they told Mason Posa, because going into his junior year, he had one scholarship offer from New Mexico. Well, they get to the third game, and there's a matchup against a quarterback who's like a linebacker at New Mexico State now, but a super fast dude who breaks out into the open. Posa over pursues. So this guy cuts back, and it looks like he's going for a touchdown. Posa runs past four of his own teammates to track him down from behind at the 22-yard line. And his dad, Javier, said Mike Tressel turned on the tape when we went to visit like a month after that, and he showed him the play. And basically what Wisconsin said was, holy crap, this kid does not stop. And I think that's what you get out of Posa. Like, he is an absolute wrecking ball. He can make plays in the backfield. My favorite play of his is probably he comes off the edge, he bats a ball at the line of scrimmage into the air. He's falling on his butt, and he manages to catch it and intercept the pass. But I think he can be really special for Wisconsin. Is it going to happen right away? You just never know, especially when you don't early enroll. And Wisconsin has some talent there, clearly, with Tackett Curtis, with Christian Allegro. But, I mean, they love him. And Max Steinecker said it in December when Max was still here. He said, I've never met a more Luke Fickell recruit in the history of recruiting. Just the toughness and certainly the wrestling background. You talk about the state championships. He won 130-3 in wrestling. He won 4 state championships in 4 different weight classes. And the thing that I love most about this is he was wrestling in a different weight division all the way into February of his senior season. And it got to a point where he was having a conversation with his dad, who was the wrestling coach. And by the way, his dad was a 3-time All-American wrestler at Oklahoma. And they were like, put me in the heavyweight division. I can score more points for us. He won the freaking heavyweight state championship while wrestling at 206 pounds, beating guys who were 50 pounds heavier than him. And yes, he was faster and more technically sound. But I think that says a lot about the kind of athlete and competitor that Mason Posa is.
Absolutely. And you mentioned his dad being the wrestler that he was at Oklahoma. And that quote from Mason Posa stood out for me. He said, the goal was to play at Oklahoma and just be a legend. But I'm kind of glad they didn't offer, because Wisconsin is one hell of a program, and I love it.
Yeah, he wanted to go to Oklahoma and said that he made multiple camp visits as a football player there. But obviously, every school is going to evaluate talent differently, and Oklahoma has a pretty high bar, and for whatever reason, didn't offer Mason. So look, one school's loss is another school's gain. The other interesting part of this is you might be wondering, well, the dude won 4 state titles. Why didn't he wrestle? He said the only school he would have considered leaving football for to wrestle was Penn State, which is coached by Cale Sanderson, an absolute legend. Penn State's won 4 consecutive national titles, but he knew Penn State was never going to offer him because he wasn't a full-time wrestler and he didn't do any of the national tournaments that guys at that level do. So he did get some offers, which is even more remarkable as a wrestler, since he didn't do any of that stuff. I mean, his dad told me this story. They went to a camp at Arizona State, and he was wrestling other guys who were already committed to college. Nobody knew who Mason Posa was as a wrestler, and he was beating all these dudes. And the Arizona State coach was like, hey, we need to have a talk. Does anybody know about your kid? And so that was kind of how the wrestling thing started in terms of college interest. But yeah, I mean, look, if Penn State wrestling offers, he's not a football player at Wisconsin. So again, one school's loss is another school's gain.
What can we expect, Aaron? I didn't even say what we can expect. What does he expect in year one?
Well, he is trying to be realistic about this, because I do think there's rolling early, participating in the offseason workouts, getting those 15 spring practices. When you come and your first practice is in fall camp, man, that is awfully difficult. It's not impossible. We've certainly seen it before. Keanu Benton, Jonathan Taylor, guys who stood out. But he said his goal is to earn a spot on the travel squad and play either on special teams or in a rotation at linebacker. And I can understand why you'd want to be a part of the travel squad this year when Wisconsin's got road games against Alabama, Michigan, Oregon, Indiana, and Minnesota. And his dad said, like, if he plays at Wisconsin early and he makes a mistake, he'll come back, and because of his mindset, he'll be like, I don't want to be embarrassed again. And the thing his dad said is, I told Tressel and Fickell, you want the best out of my son, you just tell him he can't do it. So, I mean, look, that's a dad talking about his son, but he knows him best. And so there's a lot of potential there with Mason Posa. And if you were to look at the 2025 class and just talk about who would excite you the most, he'd be at or near the top of the list.
Absolutely. Absolutely. These past 2 classes have produced a lot of great players on paper. And I'm anxious to see the growth of both those classes. But yeah, Mason Posa certainly will be a guy that we'll have our eye on very, very early down in Platteville, coming up in about like 6 weeks, not too far away. not too far away. Speaking of motivating, Brady Collins,
Oh my God.
motivator. Would you call him a motivator?
I would say that is a word I would use. Yes.
Yeah. So you had the good fortune, and by good fortune, I mean something I would never want to do, and that is work out with the team. Go through a workout that Brady Collins puts them through. And I know when we talked about it afterwards, you were sore for days, and it was not something that I feel like you've probably ever been through, even though you played college basketball. This was just at a different level.
I mean, I've been through some hard workouts before. The problem is that was half a lifetime ago when I was like 20. I'm
Yeah.
40 now. And the only other time I did anything like this was when I ran the Elver Park Hill with the basketball team, which was a staple for decades under Bo Ryan. Now they do it at Bascom, obviously. That was 10 years ago. And the goal that day was to run 12 hills. I made it up and down 4 times and puked all over at the bottom of the hill and totally embarrassed myself in front of the team. I've said before, I would like to think it somehow inspired Frank Kaminsky and Sam Decker and the crew to go on
Absolutely.
and reach the national title game. I was 30 then, so I had serious concerns about what this was going to be. But, in the interest of journalism and getting Badger Connect off the ground and telling a story that would be a little different and fun, I reached out to Brady and asked him if like he'd be good with me doing this. And what we ultimately settled on was a workout with the wide receivers and the defensive backs, the fastest guys on the team. And the quarterbacks were also there because it's part of a plan scheduling wise where the quarterbacks throw with the receivers immediately after these workouts. But he gave me the gear so I would look like a Wisconsin player. He didn't tell any of the players beforehand that I was going to be there. So all of a sudden, I know everybody was looking around like, what the hell? What is he doing here? Especially the guys who had just gotten here, like they didn't know who the hell I was.
Yeah.
And I just started like doing the stretches with them. And Brady was like, "Hey, we got a new player today, guys," or something like that. But it literally took everybody on his staff to help me out and tell me what some of these exercises were because they were doing stretches with these big rubber bands. But like they were doing stuff I'd never done before because if you play basketball, you're not doing a heavy sled pull. Like you are not, it's a prowler drag with 180 pounds. I had to take 245 plates off because I couldn't keep pace with the guys. They were throwing around medicine balls. I would say the couple things that stood out most to me during this 90-minute drill was they do sprints, and Brady and his staff taped down, basically created 3 lanes. There's a ramp that goes from the downstairs player locker room area up to the McLean Center. And so you were running at an incline. You had to do one 15-yard sprint and 3 20-yard sprints. And I got put in the last heat with Milos Vasiljevic, the walk-on quarterback.
Yeah.
And I ran as fast as I could. I did not hold a candle to him. I'd like to think it's because he's 6'4" and I'm 5'9", and his strides were just so long, but that's a real athlete right there. But so it was a leg day and a speed day. We did all sorts of stuff. I was doing like 220-pound workouts and looking over and seeing guys doing 445 pounds. So it made me feel pretty bad. They were deadlifting, so I deadlifted 220, and then I turned around and Austin Brown did 605 pounds on the deadlift. So there was that. I do a couple other things that stood out. So like I didn't want to get in the way of these guys because there's an actual season coming up, and I was standing behind the group when stretches started, and I was right next to Billy Edwards Jr. and he looked at me and he was just like, "Hey, let's go. You've been here as long as I have," and it just kind of snapped me into like the mentality you had to have. But ultimately, this ended for me with a drill they call the suitcase carry. So you get these dumbbells, and you've got to walk with them to an orange cone and back while you hold them out toward your side, so not against your body, which makes it even harder. I did 65 pounds in each hand, and then Brady turned to his assistant and was like, "Give him the 90 pounds." And I did it down and back. I dropped it once, and I was like, I honestly thought I was done. I was ready to pass out. And he goes, "Do it again." And what he knew in the interest of a good story is everybody else in the group was done. So they all started watching me. And like I made it down the front stretch, but I turned around, I had nothing left. Everybody surrounded me and everyone was like screaming at me to try and get me to finish. And I must have dropped the weights 5 times until 2 dudes on the team picked them up. I barely gripped them, but they did it so I could cross the finish line. So that was, I don't know that it was a particularly enjoyable moment, but I would say it was a highlight. I didn't have any everything left in the tank to participate in the Iowa and the Minnesota workouts that they do. But I didn't throw up. I didn't embarrass myself. And the funniest part was I was leaving and going up the steps to my car, and there were a few guys who were new to the program. They asked me what position I played. I'd like to think they were just confused because they didn't know why I was on the field, but I was like, nah, man, I don't play any position. I'm too old. I'm never coming back here. Because Brady was like, yeah, you need to do upper body to even it out. I said, I'm good.
I'm good.
I'll be coming back.
I'm good. What you do for the people, Jesse? What you do for the people?
Got to give them a reason to subscribe.
It's a good one. You mentioned the Minnesota and Iowa exercises. What are those? And we all know the reason for it, right?
Yeah, well, during spring practice, we saw it every time they got done with the practice, they'd have to do like 42 push-ups or sit-ups or whatever. For this workout, the Iowa one was a 1-minute plank. So you just hold it and try to work your core. And the Minnesota one is everybody lies on their back. They've got their legs off the ground by like 6 inches, and they all lock arms. And that's also for another minute. And that one's really hard. And the whole concept of that is you don't want to be the dude to let everyone else down. I can't imagine having to do those two things after the workout, which led to me almost passing out. But that's what they were doing on that particular day.
Yeah. Hey, that happens, and you get to think about it for an entire off season and focus on it and be reminded about it. And hopefully when it comes around to October and then November, it means something. And it actually leads to wins this time if you're a Wisconsin fan, right? I mean, that's obviously the goal of it.
That's what Brady said. He wants to get to the point where everybody frickin' hates it, but they understand why they're doing it, and it's ingrained in their mind. And you can say, oh, does that motivation really work? Does it lead to wins? Well, maybe not, but it certainly doesn't hurt to be reminded every day of a failure on a really huge level and see if you can have a different result the next time you get that opportunity.
Yeah, I completely understand where it's coming from. What do you got coming up? What's on the docket here over at Badger Connect?
Yeah, so I didn't have a platform to write on for the last like 4 weeks of spring practice. So I've got stories running on Friday and Monday looking at what I learned from watching those spring practices positionally and where things stand as we get into preseason. Because obviously they've since added a few guys through the spring transfer portal. So it's really my observations of everything I saw, what looks good, what doesn't, what needs to be better. And we got more of those Badger Bites videos on the way. So you mentioned the volleyball one, but got a couple with some hockey players. Got one with Daryl Peterson and Rico Hallman, where we're having a fun conversation down State Street, and a lot more. But the whole idea of those videos is to just provide a window into these players as people in an environment where they're a little more comfortable in, because sometimes all this feels really transactional, even for guys who stick around for a few years. So hopefully you can just get a window into these people. And obviously the same goes for the stories I'm trying to tell, and give you access to things that you can't get anywhere else. So you can check it all out at Badger Connect.
Absolutely. All right. We will be back next week. Jesse, thank you very much.
Thanks, Zach. Talk soon.
All right. There he is, Jesse Temple from Badger Connect. You've been listening to The Camp.